This story was sent to us from Rosie in Colorado. Several years ago, I was working at a popular coffee shop. There was a male customer who would come in every day and order the same thing. For about 6 months, he pursued me until I finally agreed to go out on a date with him. We were going out for about 2 months before things went left. One day I was at work and a female customer placed an order that was the exact same as his. I know you're probably thinking that lots of people order the same thing all the time. This order was unique because the drink was no longer on our menu and no other customer ordered it. The lady gave me a strange look, and during the entire transaction, she looked angry. For the next few weeks, she would show up at the coffee shop at the same exact time that he would come in and place the exact same order. By this time, he had completely disappeared, and I had not heard from him. One day the lady came in at her usual time, but instead of placing an order, she said, "You like sleeping with married men?" I was so confused. I didn't know what she was talking about. She repeated the question, and I just froze. She pulled out her cell phone and showed me a photo of her and a man we will call Steve. I couldn't believe it. The man in the photo with her was the man I was going out with a few weeks before. As she stood there with the phone in her hand, she was shaking and turning red. She looked very angry, and I was nervous about what she would do next. To my surprise, she just walked out of the coffee shop. I was so upset, I began crying. I didn't want my coworkers or my manager to know what was happening, so I decided to take a break. I walked outside to go to my car, and the lady who identified herself as Steve's wife was standing by my car with a brick in her hand. She threw the brick right through my windshield. I started to dial 911 and another car pulled up behind me. 3 other women got out of the car and started hitting and kicking me in the face. Within a few moments, a bunch of people had formed a circle around the fight. Most of the witnesses pulled out their phones to record until 2 men showed up to break up the fight. After the fight was broken up, I was so shocked to see that one of the men who broke up the fight was Steve. The lady who said she was his wife pulled out a knife and began attacking him. Everyone had backed up because they didn't want to get hurt. As Steve laid on the ground helplessly, she got in her car. Everyone thought she was leaving, but then she ran over Steve with her car before leaving the scene. After she left, I got a text message from a strange number. The message said, "You're next." The police and ambulance arrived on the scene and Steve was taken to the hospital. I found out later that he had passed away. His wife was arrested the same day, and I also learned shocking news from the detectives. Steve's wife had my address written down and had taken pictures of me in front of my house. I was so terrified. I don't know what she was planning, but I am happy I didn't end up like Steve. Stay spooked.
The story I am about to tell you happened to me about 3 years ago while I was working at my first job out of nursing school. As a new emergency room nurse, I enjoyed working with patients of all demographics, so when I was assigned to a patient who was newly released from prison, I treated him no different than I did my other patients. Let's call my patient Jack. Jack was polite and respectful when I first met him. We discussed the reason for his visit, and I assessed him carefully. His condition improved within a few hours, and the doctor had discharged him. I went over his discharge instructions with him before saying goodbye. The following day, about midway through my shift, I was so surprised to see Jack again as a patient with the same complaints. I assessed him again, and he was discharged quite quickly. While going over his discharge instructions, Jack leaned into me and said, "You know something, you're really beautiful and I would like to take you out." "No thank you, I'm married," I said. "I don't see a ring on your finger," he said. There was awkward silence between us for about 3 seconds before I said, "Okay, I hope you feel better," before walking out of his room. About a week went by and I worked my regular shifts without incident until Jack was back again, and guess who was assigned to him? Me. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was having a bad dream. This time, Jack was visibly fine, and my assessment supported that. I knew for sure he wasn't sick this time, but as a nurse you must treat the patient's symptoms. While he was being discharged, I could feel Jack staring at me, but I tried my best not to make eye contact with him. He said, "I know I'm being discharged, but I'm not leaving until you agree to let me take you out. I'm not here because I'm sick, I'm here because I love you." I was uncomfortable during the other encounters I had with him, but this time I was scared. I couldn't believe what was happening and I froze. That is when Jack walked over to me and grabbed me by the arm and told me, "I will see you later." I didn't say anything. I walked over to the nursing station and called security to escort him from the premises. I continued to work my shift for the next several hours until my shift ended at 11 o'clock. It took me about 2 minutes to walk to the employee parking lot, which was across the street from our main building. I walked over to my car, and as I unlocked my car, I felt someone grab me from behind and whispered, "Hey baby, what took you so long?" I knew immediately that it was Jack because he had a very distinct voice. I was so scared. I started screaming. When I finally broke free from him, I was able to get about 10 feet away from him, and there he was, standing in front of my car and glaring at me with a smirk on his face. "How about that date? Is tonight a good night for you?" I couldn't believe it. "You're fucking sick. I'm calling the cops." I yelled at him. I reached into my purse for my cell phone, but as soon as I pulled it out, Jack started running towards me and knocked my phone and car keys out of my hand. He grabbed me and said, "I'm not going back to jail, you fucking bitch." I was so scared. I thought for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to make it home alive. "Please let me go," I begged him. "If I let you go, will you go on a date with me?" I told him yes, and he let me go. As soon as he let me go, one of our hospital security guards was patrolling the area, and I waved to get his attention. Jack ran away as the security guard was driving towards us. The security guard asked me if I was okay, and I could barely explain what happened. He saw my phone and keys on the ground, and he stepped out of his car to pick them up. Then he drove me back to the security office where he waited with me until the cops came. By the time the police came, I was able to give a statement, but I was still too shaken up to drive, so I called my sister to pick me up. I took a few days off from work to mentally recover, and when I returned, I was still nervous that I would turn the corner and Jack would be right there waiting for me. For the next 3 months, I had to be escorted to my car after my shift ended. I later found out that Jack had been arrested a few days after he assaulted me. He was also in violation of his parole and would be returned to prison eventually. I also found out that a few days before I met him, he had been released from prison after serving a 25-year sentence for a murder he committed. He also had an arrest record which included assaulting an ex-girlfriend. I can't help but wonder, if he acted so aggressively toward me in a controlled environment, how much more aggressive he would have been in a place where there are no cameras or security. This story was sent to us from Jessica. About 4 years ago, I started a new job at a small company as the HR manager. On my second day, I was instructed by my superiors to terminate an employee. I had never met the employee before, so I wasn't really sure what to expect or what type of reaction I would receive. This was a smaller company, so there was no security if things went left. I called the employee into the office, and he arrived within a few hours. I introduced myself to him and explained to him the reason for the meeting. He couldn't understand why he was being fired and wanted a more in-depth explanation. I tried my best to explain things to him with the little bit of information I had. As I spoke, he became increasingly upset and began yelling. I tried to calm him down, but that only made him more mad. He started calling me names and cursing at me. I looked through my office door, which was made out of glass, and I saw my coworkers looking. They were looking, but nobody was doing anything to help me at all. He got up and walked out of the office. He slammed the door so hard that it shattered. When I reported what happened to upper management, I was surprised that they didn't contact the police. I was told that everyone was just happy to see him leave and the shattered door was the least of their worries. They just called someone in to fix it, and within a few days everything in the office was back to normal. About a week after the incident, I started getting blocked calls to the office phone, but no one would ever say anything. One evening on a Friday, my coworkers decided to leave early. I was still new, so I didn't want to leave early and make a bad impression. I decided to stay and work a little later. When I left, I would have to turn off the appliances and lock the door. About 20 minutes after my coworkers left, I heard the phone ring and no said anything. About a minute later, the main door opened. I left my office to greet the visitor, and to my surprise, standing there was the employee I fired the week before. He looked very angry and he had something that looked like a sword in his hand. He started yelling at me and calling me awful names. He even banged his head on the wall, which caused his forehead to split open. There was blood everywhere and he didn't even appear to be in pain. I kept backing up to get away from him, and before I knew it, I had backed back into my office. I locked the door quickly and reached for the phone on my desk. I dialed 911 and I told the officer to send someone quickly. He was standing outside of my office laughing. Suddenly the glass door shattered. He had punched the door so hard. I stood behind my desk and shook in fear as he inched closer with the sword. I picked up my chair and threw it at him, but that only made him angrier. He grabbed me and put the sword to my neck. I thought I was going to die. When the officers showed up, they yelled at him to drop his weapon. He used me as a shield. The more the police yelled at him, the more he laughed and the more scared I became. After about 30 minutes, I heard a shot and the man let me go and fell to the ground. The police had shot him from behind to save my life. In addition to the sword, the officers found a suicide note in his pocket, so apparently, he was going to hurt me and then himself. I couldn't believe what was happening to me. That same day of the incident, I quit that job and never returned. I didn't want to work for a company that doesn't protect its employees. I also didn't trust my coworkers again. Stay spooked.